And wow, it is not Friday. It feels like a Friday, but good afternoon. My name is Ryan Belmore. I am the owner and publisher of What's Up Newp, and we have a very exciting program here for you today, and in partnership with HousingWorksRI as well as Senator Euer and some other partners. We're going to be chatting about the big issue at hand here on Aquidneck Island and in Newport, and that is Aquidneck Island's housing challenges. And one of our co-hosts, or the host with the most, is Senator Dawn Euer, who represents Newport and Jamestown. How are you, Senator?
I'm good, Ryan. Thanks for having me. Thanks for hosting this today.
And it feels like a Friday, right?
It does feel like a Friday. Yeah, I think it's the holiday week. Yeah.
Yes, and the short week. And we have been putting this program together for weeks now. And we wanted to make sure we had the right guests and the right partners. Why is it important to have this conversation today?
You know, housing, it's just one of those fundamental needs that everybody has. Everybody needs to have a place to lay their head down at night. Housing, we were in a housing crisis before the pandemic, and like many things, the pandemic has really just worsened the negative implications in our housing situation in the state and in Newport on Aquidneck Island. What we're seeing right now, I feel like it's almost a gold rush around housing. And what's happening is that families are being displaced, year-round residents are having a hard time to find a place to live. And we're really at a crossroads in our recovery from the pandemic. And either we can put in place policies that are going to support families and support year-round residents, or we can continue this march towards a Gilded Age 2.0.
Very difficult question. I hate to... Can we fix what's going on right now? I recently heard from Newport residents, one whose rent was going up 52% month over month, one was going up 35%, one was going up 8%. That is just in the last 2 weeks and just people who have talked to me. Can we actually now there's affordable housing and there's of being affordable to live in Newport. We will get to that. But can this issue be fixed?
Well, I mean, it didn't become a crisis overnight, so it's not going to be resolved overnight. But that doesn't mean that we can't take steps to fix it and to address the situation. So I absolutely think, like everything else, there's public policy decisions being made, and we need to make ones that are going to help folks find and stay in their homes.
What are we hoping to accomplish today with this forum?
Yeah, I think today, you know, we have a good group of folks with us today from HousingWorks Rhode Island, from Church Community Housing, and from the Newport Housing Authority, who can just kind of give some of both the statewide and Newport County perspective as well as the local perspective on kind of what's happening with housing, what policies are kind of up at bat at the State House, and also what how some of these programs impact us here locally in Newport and on Aquidneck Island.
Excellent. Well, whenever you are ready to get underway, please do.
Well, so thanks again, Ryan, for hosting today and for bringing us all together. As I said, you know, housing really it's a critical need, and we are really at a crossroads here. And so first up today, we're going to have Brenda Clement, the Director of Housing Works at Roger Williams University, and Annette Bourne, who's a Research and Policy Director of Housing Works Rhode Island. They're going to talk through, they have a short presentation for us to just kind of give us some context and some numbers about the housing crisis and how it manifests here in Newport County and in Rhode Island. So Brenda and Annette, thank you so much for joining us. And I know that you have a slideshow. If you have any remarks you want to give before you launch into it, but I know Ryan will pull up the presentation whenever you're ready.
So I'm going to let my colleague Annette go first to give you just the facts. That's what we like to do at HousingWorks, is talk about the facts and statistics, and then I'll come back and wrap up with some suggestions around policy changes both at the local and state level that we can work on as communities. So Annette, please take it away.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Senator Euer. Very rapid fire facts here. Going to go through these slides. We will be making this presentation available later, so thank you very much, Ryan. So this is an overview of the housing challenges. I like to talk about housing affordability generally, rather than affordable housing, which has a different connotation for people. What you see here is obviously the very unique geography that is Newport County. And we do have a regional section in our housing fact book. These are islands communities in a way, connected by roadways, but also by a lot of history. So gonna move rapidly. Next slide. HousingWorks Rhode Island, we're a community partner at Roger Williams University. Our annual housing fact book, which will be released in October, available on our website with lots of other information. Please join us at HousingWorksRI.org. Next slide, please. I'm going to skip over the agenda because we're just moving very rapidly. Housing impacts our entire well-being. The social determinants of health is a concept that was developed by the World Health Organization, also adopted by the CDC. Our health equity zones across Rhode Island, which also operate in Newport, see the world through this lens. COVID-19 has unfortunately made it all too real for people when we realize the disparate impact that your zip code actually has on what your health outcomes are. And for us in housing, as you can see here, the little house is the axle to what we see happening in this situation, as well as other eras that we've lived through. Many opportunity indices exist now. You can go to AARP. Enterprise Foundation hosts a site. Park is also another site where you can type in your address, your zip code, and you will see what is around you as your neighborhood, including your housing affordability. Next slide, please. This is a range of the Aquidneck Island households where you will see Newport particularly standing out is that it has the highest population of single person households. However, as years have gone by, we know that this population, particularly those over 65, are actually a growing presence in all of the Aquidneck Island, so the 3 communities of Aquidneck Island. And fewer households have children under 18, which is also a growing trend, unfortunately. You know, for some, I think of it as unfortunate. Next slide, please. The variety of housing types, whether they are single family or multifamily, how many bedrooms, the age of housing, all go into how do we think about a community? Do we need a predominance of 3-bedroom houses? Do we need a predominance of 1-bedroom or efficiencies? It goes back to who are those households? Can we build them in only single family, depending on our zoning? Can we build multifamily? If we can build multifamily, can we build multifamily by right, which means you do not need some sort of variance from the zoning board? And the age of housing, which we all love the fact that we live in New England and we have many historic properties. Unfortunately, that means that we need to be extra careful about whether these properties are lead safe, in addition to other accessibility issues like stairs and the health and safety that comes along with that age of housing. Next slide, please. Do we have owner or renter occupied housing? Again, you see the difference in the 3 communities of Aquidneck Island here, where Newport actually does have a predominance of rental housing. Middletown actually has a near even break. This is mostly related to naval housing as a historic factor in these communities. Portsmouth is mostly dominated by single family owner-occupied housing. The cost burdens, which is where we get into housing affordability, is actually really quite high, meaning that these renters and homeowners pay more than 30% of their income toward their housing costs, which is what we consider cost burdened, meaning that what are you really going to do to buy groceries, pay for healthcare, pay for childcare? Those all need to be considered deeply when we are thinking about paying more than 30% for your housing. Next slide, please. So these are the facts. This is last year's Housing Fact Book. Across the region of Aquidneck Island and neighboring towns, that map that I showed you in the beginning, 63% of current households could not afford to buy the region's median home price. It may be great if you want to, if you already own and you don't want to move. It's not so great if you are a renter and you want to buy in the region, or if you are from somewhere else in the state and you just got a job and you don't really want to be commuting that far every day. Next slide, please. These are the municipal housing facts for Middletown and Portsmouth. These are found in the Housing Fact Book each year. As you can see, the incomes needed to buy or rent in these communities greatly exceed what your median household incomes are in these communities. Following up on the next slide with Newport, where I hate to tell you, and I realize this is a Q1 2020 to Q1 2021 look from RI Living. But right now, if this trend continues, there's going to be nearly a 50% increase year over year. There's not a lot of home sales on the market, so we are also really suffering from a shortage of homes that are for sale. So it's not to suggest that the value really should be 50% higher, but this is also a reflection of supply and demand. Next slide, please. And the reality is, if you are a lower income household of 3, so that could be 2 adults and a child, that could be 1 adult and 2 children, it could be 3 adults living together. The rent or housing costs that would be affordable to this range of incomes is simply too low for what really can be afforded, particularly if you are in that lowest rung of income, thinking of a minimum wage earner with a couple of children. Can they really find a 2-bedroom apartment for under $700 a month? Very doubtful. Next slide, please. Again, lots of reasons to live in the region, but whether or not a person could afford to live here is a whole other question. Next slide, please. And what Brenda will be speaking to is that we do have a higher household creation than population growth. I know we think about population, but the fact is that we are forming households at a faster rate than we are creating our population. Next slide, please. And that growth is primarily coming from, in the Southeast Rhode Island region, from households that are age 65 and older. Next slide, please. On employment, however, where we are growing employment are not necessarily in those areas that are going to pay the highest. Next slide, please. This is a sample of our top sector occupations and the hourly wage that would be needed to afford housing costs in the region. And as you can see, the majority of these occupations will not meet that need. And I'm happy to hand it over to Brenda, who is going to speak to the policies that we believe can address these needs.
Thanks, Annette. And Annette covered a lot of ground with lots of statistics and information. And as she mentioned, it will be posted for you to look at and digest a little bit more. But, basic message is that Rent is and housing payments are just too high for many of critical workers and essential workers in the communities that throughout Aquidneck Island. Again, lots of things that we can do. That's the good news on this front. One is that we can finally put a dedicated funding stream within the state budgets to continue to invest and preserve existing affordable housing. Rhode Island is one of the few states across the country that in the Northeast that does not have that dedicated funding stream. At the local level, looking for ways to make building homes and building units easier is something that local communities can work with the local partners on and address zoning and regulatory barriers. So there are a lot of policy recommendations and things that we can do. There's several pieces of legislation that the senator and others have been involved with around the dedicated funding stream that we hope will get enacted. The governor has included it in this budget, and both the leadership and House and Senate have indicated their support for it. So, investing, increasing. We have just been underproducing housing for a long period of time in Rhode Island. The last kind of housing boom, if you will, was in the late 70s, early 80s, and we just have not been keeping pace with growing need and even meeting existing need. Again, at the local, you can go to the next slide. We're just going to go through this because I really want to hear from our local partners as well. But there are things that individual cities and towns in Aquidneck Island can do to address some of the issues, including looking at repurposing. As we know, retail space and commercial space has gone through lots of changing dynamics. Not only this was happening even before the pandemic, but accelerated even more by the pandemic. Are there ways that we can repurpose and reuse spaces in our communities as well too? And as I already mentioned, looking at ways to address zoning challenges and zoning barriers. You can go on to the next slide. This, even with the housing bond that voters approved at the special election this past spring, Rhode Island is still dead last in New England in terms of our state investment in housing, and have been in that dead last position for a long period of time. So the dedicated funding stream legislation that the senator and others have been sponsoring is critical for moving forward. And that last slide, and love to turn it over to our partners. Again, we just simply have not been building enough, particularly multi-family housing. And this slide's hard to see all of the details, but suffice it to say, as I mentioned, that we've just been underproducing for way too long in Rhode Island. And so, it's a basic economics problem. When supply is constricted and demand is steady or growing, price goes up. And as we've seen, price has gone up dramatically in many communities throughout the state. So again, we'll stop there. We filled your heads with lots of facts and information, and look forward to discussion and from hearing from our local partners on the ground.
Thank you so much, Brenda and Annette. That's really a lot of information, and we have a lot to unpack there. I do think that just in the interest of time, I think we'll move on to hear from Rhonda Mitchell, who's the Executive Director of the Newport Housing Authority, and she can give us some local perspective. And so, Rhonda, welcome. And if you want to go ahead and share whatever remarks you have.
Sure. Good afternoon, and thank you. I want to thank you, Senator Euer, and thank What's Up Newport and HousingWorks Rhode Island for really sponsoring this really important forum on housing and housing affordability here in our state. According to a 2020 Urban Institute report, only 1 in 5 families who's eligible to receive housing assistance actually receives it. And here in Newport at the Housing Authority, we have about 10,000 applicants on our waiting list for housing assistance between our public housing program, our Section 8 program, and our tax credit program. And the challenge is that we only have about 1,100 apartments or housing subsidies to serve the families. And with a turnover rate of about 5% a year, that allows the Housing Authority to serve about 50 to 60 families, new families, on an annual basis. And when you look at 10,000 applicants and potentially serving 55 households a year, we're talking about 180 years to be able to serve every family on our list. So the need is staggering, and the lack of supply is truly a crisis. Annette and Brenda provided some great numbers. The average 2-bedroom rent, $1,427 a month. Well, you'd need to earn $57,000 a year to afford that rent. That's about $27 an hour a household would need to earn. Yet minimum wage pays less than $24,000 a year. So you'd need to have more than 2 minimum wage jobs to be able to afford that average 2-bedroom rent here in Newport. So a rent that is affordable to a minimum wage earner here in Rhode Island is about $512 a month. And you just don't see those rents without housing subsidies. Annette had mentioned that 45% of Newporters are housing cost burdened, and it's 50 and 52% in Portsmouth and Middletown. And she gave you some numbers around who's eligible for housing assistance. So for a single person, and it was mentioned that that's our largest growing population is single person households. People may be surprised to find out that the numbers are, a single person earning between $45,000 and $56,000 a year actually qualifies for affordable housing here in Newport, depending on the type of program that it is. And for a household of 4, the numbers are about $63,000 to $80,000 a year, and you would be income eligible for housing. About 80 to 85% of the applicants, those 10,000 applicants on our waiting list, are extremely low income. And that's a single person making less than $22,000 a year, or a household of 4 making less than $32,000 a year. The families living within the housing authority in our 1,100 apartments or the private rental apartments with voucher subsidies are seniors, are elderly and disabled. The average income is about $15,000 a year. This means they can afford about $375 a month in rent. Our family housing programs, the average income is about $20,000 a year. So we're talking about $500 in rent that's affordable. But we said the average 2-bedroom rent is about $1,400 a month. So when 85 to 90% of our households earn less than $35,000 a year, whether they're working part-time, full-time, whether they're elderly, disabled, or unemployed, we have a real problem. And I do want to say, I think there's a lot of misconception out there about who is living in housing. And it's less than 2% of all the families that we're serving here in Newport that receive cash assistance through the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program, formerly called welfare. That's just not who the population is. Low-wage working families, our seniors, our disabled, our veterans. In our Section 8 program, we have about 500 households. The Housing Authority subsidizes about $1,000 to $1,100 a month in rents to landlords, contributing about $6 million a year, to landlords to cover the difference in rent between what the family can afford and what the government subsidy is. So again, the situation is truly dire, and the COVID-19 pandemic has only intensified the need for stable, healthy, affordable housing. And no one should have to face housing insecurity, especially not in a pandemic. But the sad reality is that, millions of Americans do, and that it happens each and every day right here on Aquidneck Island. So I want to thank you for allowing me to be here. The Housing Authority certainly wants to be part of the solution on this. We are so excited. We appreciate the support, Senator Euer, on getting the legislation passed on the source of income bill. Those protections to not discriminate against a family based on the source of income was a great step forward. We're thrilled about the new permanent funding stream, the legislation that you've introduced with your colleagues. Those are the steps. That's a part of the solution. That's how we're going to get there. It's housing preservation and production. It's a new permanent voucher assistance. It's access to upward economic mobility and other opportunities. This is how we're going to allow housing to serve as a path toward equity, racial equity, health equity, educational equity, and economic equity. So thank you. I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, Rhonda. Appreciate your remarks and your dedication to this work. And Newport Housing Authority plays a critical role in meeting the needs of our residents. And I think, one of the things too that that I think is often a misconception is, it's generational Newporters live in Newport Housing Authority properties. And I think, I hear from people all the time who say that, they've born at Newport Hospital, grew up here, their families are from here, and they don't want to leave Newport, and are concerned about that. So I think there's a lot more to discuss and a lot more to unpack, but I do want to bring up Christian Belden, who's the Executive Director of Church Community Housing Corporation, and he also can provide additional local perspective on the housing issues that we're facing in Newport and the Aquidneck Island. So Christian, welcome. Thank you for being here today, and if you want to go ahead and share your thoughts.
Sure. Thank you, Senator Euer, and thank you, What's Up Newp and HousingWorks and the Newport Housing Authority. It's great to be a part of this forum today. A lot of what has been said already, I can echo. And I think, one of the things I'll talk about are the unique challenges that we face here on the island in terms of developing affordable housing. We have high land values. Some of the rest of Rhode Island has high land values as well, but certainly across Newport County, we have higher land values that are seen in some of the communities in the northern part of the state. And we also have higher construction costs. And as a result, it makes it very challenging to get the funding that's necessary to develop affordable housing in these high-cost communities. We, before the pandemic even, had been submitting applications to build housing in Middletown and Tiverton and Jamestown, and been told that the costs were simply too high. That problem has only been exacerbated as a result of the building material shortages and the associated cost increases, as well as a lack of capacity in the trades. And we have a real workforce shortage here that is causing labor costs to increase as well. So we really have a perfect storm of cost increases that is making it very difficult to propose a development in a community that will be complementary to the existing neighborhood, which is something here at Church Community Housing we feel very strongly about. We've been in business now for 52 years, and we see ourselves as a partner with the communities that we work in. Unlike the stories that I hear about some for-profit developers that try to do developments that are out of scale and really, don't fit within the community that they're applying to or proposing it for, we're always trying to do developments that will fit in and that will be seen as a resource and an amenity community. And doing those developments is just very challenging when the funding is as limited as it has been and when the cost constraints have been what they have been. And so, the new dedicated funding source is certainly one potential solution to address the cost side of things. Another challenge that we have in Newport is that Newport has exceeded its 10% affordable housing mandate. And so the funders, again, see Newport as being a lower priority for the production of new affordable housing units than other communities that have not achieved their 10% or even gotten close to that, and especially when developing affordable housing in those other communities may be less costly. It puts Newport at a disadvantage, but that doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities in Newport as well. The real challenge and opportunity in Newport is the preservation of the existing housing. The way that the housing is funded it means that you can often support the day-to-day operations, but over time, you don't have the funds available to make necessary upgrades and improvements when you need a new heating system, when you need to upgrade the cabinets and the bathrooms. That requires a refinance, renovation, recapitalization of these properties. And so again, having a dedicated funding source that's available to facilitate those preservation transactions is incredibly important. And those are the sort of conventional means of addressing the issues. We've also been working with the Women's Resource Center, the Newport Health Equity Zone, to hire Smart Growth America to come in and do an equitable development plan for the North End. And some of the strategies that we've discussed through that partnership is requiring community benefits agreements for large developments in the North End, and tax stabilization, because while the economic investment that the bridge and highway realignment vacant land will create, and the increases in density that are proposed through the new draft zoning ordinance, those investments are terrific, but investments often result in gentrification, in a higher cost of living and higher property values. And so if you don't take necessary measures to offset those pressures, it will mean that those investments have just exacerbated the lack of affordability in a community. And so, requiring community benefits agreements for those large developments and looking at tax stabilization for existing residents so that their property taxes don't increase so much that they are forced to sell and move out are some of the strategies and options that we're working on here in the community. I appreciate, again, the opportunity to be a part of this great forum.
Thank you so much, Christian. And that I know you've been very active in the health equity zone, as you're talking about, in coming up with broad, creative, important solutions. And I think those conversations are so important. As I've been watching the headlines of the property sales that have been happening at record sales amounts, one of the things that is hard to understand, while I think is that while those properties are being sold at record high prices, that in turn affects the costs of every neighboring property owner in that neighborhood, because the assessments then go up, which then in turn means the tax liability goes up. And one thing that I hear a lot about is folks who've lived here their whole life, who the value of their property has gone up so much that now they aren't going to be able to afford their property tax. And I think having that understanding that where there's this pressure that for current property owners and year-round residents that are feeling this pressure, even though they're not trying to sell their house and they're not trying to buy a house, but they're still feeling the impacts of the market rates right now, and it's causing their costs to go up as well. I think that's such an important component for folks to understand, that these things are all connected in that way. And I appreciate, again, I know you've been working with a group trying to come up with solutions to try to look at how we can have both development and also maintain our year-round residents. So I think these are who we have for presentations. And now I think Ryan and I wanted to do some Q&A and have a little bit of a discussion for the rest of the program. So I know, Ryan, I've been kind of interjecting in the midst here. So I don't know if you had a question you wanted to weigh in on.
Well, we have lots of questions that are popping up in the comments as well. And I ask everybody to keep dropping those comments as well as questions in there, and we'll get to them in just a few minutes. So if you want to just put those in the comments, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, you can continue to do that, and we'll get to as many as possible. And I guess, where to start here. is, what can the average Quinnipiac Island resident do to support the work that Christian's doing, the work that Rhonda's doing? And we know what we can do to support Dawn, but maybe Dawn can share that as well, or Brenda. What can the average person watching, listening, whether they need affordable housing or live in affordable housing or don't, what can they do to support your efforts?
This is Brenda. I'll start, but please, everybody jump in. Again, I think Senator has been fabulous and wonderful on housing issues for a long time, but you have lots of other members of your delegation, including the chair of House Finance Committee, that needs to continue to hear from you about the importance of funding and money and resources. Local city council and town council members need to be part of the discussion and part of the solution about, where do you want growth in your community? Where does it make sense to encourage development? What do we want to preserve and protect in those communities? And those are local conversations that everybody needs to be part of.
Christian or Rhonda or Dawn?
I would agree with Brenda. I'd say, for everyday Newporters and Aquidneck Islanders, contact your legislators. Let them know that housing matters in your community, housing at varying income levels. But we've got to show our support of the housing programs, and that's making this known to our legislators, our local councils, our state and our United States delegates as well. So we're fortunate, Dawn, for your support, and it means a lot, but we've got to get that word out there.
And Christian, is the same thing with you? You need the support of city, state is the best form of support you can get?
Yeah, short of a shameless appeal to have people click on the donate here button on our website. Yeah, absolutely. Talking to your representative, showing your support, but also, it's a strange political environment that we're in right now. And so if people know friends or family members who are, advancing some of these conspiracy theories that are out there, you might want to talk to them and just indicate your support for affordable housing, because increasingly we're seeing some just bizarre ideas out there that certainly are not helpful when we're trying to do this important work.
In Dawn, I'll let you follow up there, but then I do have a question, but go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, to add on to those comments, I think one of the things that becomes very difficult about the housing conversation is that there are a lot of attempts to kind of shame people for being poor. But what I will say is that it is super helpful to hear personal stories. And so for people who are willing and comfortable to share their personal story about, the challenges that they've had, if they wanted to contact me through my social media, and you want to do it anonymously, that I can carry your story and the advocacy that I do at the State House and here on a local level, I'd be happy to do that. I will tell you that when I first ran for office in 2017 and was knocking on doors, the number one thing I heard was housing, 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 housing. And I will tell you, it has not gotten better. It has only gotten worse. And I do think that with the pandemic, I have heard from constituents who never thought that they would need to use the food bank, or they never thought that they would be in need for rental assistance. But that has been the great equalizer. And so I think people should not be ashamed to be in the position that they're in. It is very difficult. It's a housing crisis. And so I would just encourage folks to share your personal stories, again, with me or through letters to the editor, through conversations with my colleagues in government.
Now, Senator, when people hear affordable housing, that affordable housing means something different to everybody, whether they're looking to buy a home and they're looking for an affordable home, or they're looking for an affordable year-round rental. This question and the topic of affordable housing, every time we talk about it, well, are we only talking about low-income, government-subsidized housing? Are we only talking about not spending more than 30% of your annual salary on a home. When we talk about affordable housing or affordable real estate apartments, where are we going in your direction?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think, to the point that I made earlier, these things are all connected, right? Like if we get more housing stock in place, that changes the market dynamics, that increases the affordability for everybody. I think that, yes, there's some very specific affordable housing programs that go to certain programs that are, have deed restrictions on what, or financial financing restrictions on, the percentage of rent that the property owner can charge. But again, overall, this in particular, the dedicated funding stream for housing, that goes to help maintain our housing programs. Newport benefits from that. We benefit it by preserving, affordable housing properties and maintaining the affordable housing that we have. And ideally, we would be looking for more development. I know that the Newport Housing Authority has property that they would love to build on, and therefore that would be increasing the number of units. If you increase the supply, again, market economics, you increase the supply, that will help ease the cost pressures.
Rhonda, to put this all in perspective, about how many people are on a waiting list? How many people are looking for maybe that Section 8 housing, or, how many people are out there waiting for housing, affordable housing in Newport?
So in Newport, our waiting list is 10,000 households are on our waiting list, and that's between our public housing apartments, the tax credit funded apartments, and our housing choice voucher subsidies, what's generally called Section 8. 10,000 applicants.
All right, that's a big. Oh, okay, I can do that.
I was just going to say, Ryan, if you could pull up the last couple of slides in our presentation, and just back to the conversation about affordability and kind of people's understanding or misunderstanding about it. I'm going to go one more, I think. Nope, one more after that. Nope, keep going. Sorry, longer than I thought. It's the last two, I think, one of the last slides. If we can't find it, that's fine.
We will take a look here.
There we go. Now back to the two paths of affordability.
Okay. Yeah, hold on one second. It's got its own mind today.
So you're absolutely right that, essentially, everybody needs affordable housing, right? Regardless of what your income level is, if you're spending more than, that 30% of your income towards housing, it means that something else in your budget has to give, right? And if you're at the higher income level, that means that, maybe you don't buy another car, or you don't go on vacation, or you don't go out to eat as much, you don't do other things. But as you get at the lower income level, those choices become much more dire. You have to choose between rent and heat. You have to choose between rent and picking up prescriptions. And, we know that at the lower income level, for many, many people, even prior to the pandemic, they were struggling. Ironically, throughout the whole pandemic, we had called those people essential workers, right? People who were bagging our groceries and taking care of people in our assisted living facilities and nursing home care. And those are the very people that continue to struggle. So we need, both. We know, even with the dedicated funding stream, even with voters approving bonds, even with what looks like potentially a robust federal investment into infrastructure that will include housing, we're just never going to be able to subsidize ourselves out of this problem. There's never enough money to address the demand and the need that we know that has. So we need to look for ways to provide incentives and to increase the supply so that there's both market priced affordable housing and then some of that longer term goal that targets many of those lower income wage earners in our communities. As you know, we have on our books in Rhode Island a law that requires all communities to get to 10% of their housing stock as affordable. And that's number two in that slide, that long-term affordability that has some sort of subsidy and deed restriction. But if the rest of the market isn't working right either, there's, that, and that's what we're seeing, the pressure on that more median income individual in both the home ownership and rental market that we need to be able to increase. So looking for ways to increase supply and is the only way that I know of to address that demand.
Thank you. And Senator?
Yeah, so I have, one of the things that I hear a lot, and I just wanted to, pose this, I think, really to Rhonda and Christian, back to my earlier point, having specific examples really helps kind of drive the point home on some of these conversations. And I know that one of the things that everybody talked about is having these statewide funds used for, for both preservation of units and also for new units. I know that I think it was last year that Festival Field changed ownership, and part of the change of ownership was that they had to agree to maintain their affordability provisions. And I think that preserved something over 100 units here in Newport. And I know that's neither of your organization's property, but I think that's a really good example of an example of preservation that we were able to accomplish with statewide funding. And so just to drive that point home that the money from these efforts really does come back and help Newport and support Newporters. But Rhonda and Christian, from your organizations, are there some specific projects or upcoming projects that you would like to see done that you think that these funds would be able to help support or have helped support in the recent past?
Sure. I mean, in Newport, we had started with our Hope 6 years ago, and early 2000s, the redevelopment of a severely distressed public housing property, Autonomy Hill, into Newport Heights, a vibrant mixed income housing community, still, affordable for families at some of the lowest income levels, but also having market rate units, for families just above the 80% of the area median income. And most recently in Park Home. We've been renovating and revitalizing the properties there for the last few years. It takes so many sources of income. I mean, it takes us 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 years to get to one phase of a closing for 50 to 70 units to renovate 80-year-old distressed public housing properties. So we do talk about preservation as well as production because they're both needed. We're never going to address everybody on the waiting list if we don't do production. But for the families who have been fortunate enough to receive housing assistance through an apartment or a subsidy, we do need to maintain the quality of those units so that people continue to live with dignity. So students can study. I mean, we really saw remote working, distance learning in schools, the need for broadband. In our housing communities. So Park Home and Autonomy Hill, I think, are two incredible properties that have benefited from the funding that has been made available in Rhode Island.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I have similar stories. We are in the process of doing preservation transactions and developing new properties. We have a terrific opportunity with the town of Portsmouth. We've entered into a memorandum of understanding with the town to exclusively work on redeveloping 2 of their former schools, the Ann Hutchinson School and the Cogshaw School. And the Ann Hutchinson School actually houses the town's senior center. And so we're looking at a 40-unit elderly housing development on that same site while renovating and redeveloping the senior center. And the other school actually has a ball field and a playground in the backyard and is on public transportation. And so we're looking at producing some family housing there. And I think, to have a good integrated mix, I think we're looking at majority market rate housing, probably 70 or 80% would be market rate, and then 20 to 30% would be affordable. And, when you think about the children that would grow up in that housing with the ball field and playground behind, going to Portsmouth schools, on public transportation, I think it's a really tremendous opportunity for those families to provide, opportunities to their children, that they otherwise wouldn't have access to. We're also working on a new 40-unit expansion to one of our existing elderly developments in Middletown called West House on Forest Avenue. And we're working with the town of Jamestown in a partnership to simultaneously preserve open space for watershed protection and develop affordable housing on the upland developable area. And we're looking at preserving our assisted living facility in Middletown at Forest Farm, which is a 50-unit development. Fortunately, we have really great relationships with the municipalities that we work in. We have opportunities to create affordable housing, and we have the properties in our portfolio that need to be preserved. To the extent that the funding is available, we'll continue to do these developments and grow our capacity and do more of it. It's been challenging in recent years, but we continue to work at it, and we really thank you for your efforts to try to solve the problems that have made it very difficult to get these developments done.
Thank you so much. I think it's so important to hear and understand how how those state funds are being used, and I think those projects are critically important. So I appreciate you kind of giving us a rundown. Ryan, I know that you said that there's some comments or questions in the comments.
There is. There are quite a few questions and comments regarding recent. Well, I'll pull up one of the comments. Nobody got shrunk. That's good. Now, granted, these are in live time, so I'm not sure exactly what Penny is legislation. Newport City Council requested the Leagues of Cities and Towns review. Has a review begun, and what is expected to be the outcome? And just a follow up, Penny adds another one here. Is this the same legislation? Can you speak to the comments made by the council regarding funding not being returned to the cities at all? So I believe Penny, please comment if I'm wrong, but I believe she's talking about the transfer tax that was recently discussed by Newport City Council. That's come up over the last couple terms now. And just wondering if perhaps Senator, you could speak to the proposed transfer tax. Anybody attending or watching city council meetings heard that some opposition that the money wasn't going to come back to towns, that it was going to stay up at the state. I am super hydrating that conversation, but go ahead.
Right. Yeah. So yes, this is the same legislation. So when any of us have talked about the dedicated funding stream, it is funded through a transfer tax on real estate closings. And, again, the thinking on this is that, as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, these sales of the high value homes really have a direct impact to the affordability of everybody in town. And so it just makes sense to take a fee on those sales and direct it towards affordable housing needs. And so that's, we are, as HousingWorks presentation showed, we're one of the states with the lowest financing towards these programs. And I think, as you heard from our panelists, those funds really would benefit programs here in Newport and on Aquidneck Island. To the point of I'm not sure as far as the League and Cities of Towns, if they have weighed in yet on it.
There is another question, another two here. Sue says, does HUD offer any help here with affordable housing? Maybe in the form of a matching grant that was supercharged state funding. And I'm just going to throw her other comment up here because she comes up with her own form of funding. And that is at a percentage to fund affordable housing with second homes. Any thoughts there?
So as Christian and Rhonda mentioned, all of the housing deals have multiple funding sources, including funding and money from HUD. Actually, the average affordable housing deal has anywhere from 8 to 12 different funding. I think the record one I saw one time had 16 different separate sources of funding and money to manage and try to pull all the pieces together. So HUD is at the table. HUD is the budget that's being proposed in the infrastructure package has some very robust spending numbers for housing, much more than we've ever seen, at least since I've been doing this work. So, we're HUD's already at the table and looks like they'll continue to be a major player at the table. The conveyance tax and the conversation about kind of, why isn't the community getting their share of the conveyance tax? I mean, I would argue with you that you are getting your share. You're getting more than your share, actually, because all of these properties and all of the funding and money that are invested back into affordable housing and developments and projects are properties that provide housing for your workers, but also stay on local property tax rolls. And so you're benefiting from many, in many ways, in many different ways from that investment that we make into the conveyance tax.
Great question here. Can the state add more teeth to the requirements of 10% housing be affordable since many communities are non-compliant? Senator, or anybody who wants to take it?
I would love to. I've had legislation in previous years to tie it in with school funding formulas, to tie it in different ways. So I agree. I think that the state should do more. And I think those of us representing Newport, Woonsocket, and I forget, there's one or two other communities who do represent communities that do meet that threshold. That being said, I think the carrots and sticks approach is always best. And so that's why, as we've been trying to think about that and talk about that on the state level, we've looking at different funding formulas and how that could be impacted. But obviously the majority of communities aren't meeting that threshold, and so they're somewhat resistant to that. So.
So just to add to, our law is based on Massachusetts law called 40B, and within the 40B law, Massachusetts has a number of incentives, including a 40S program, which encourages and allows communities to get a bump up in their school aid formula if they see increased student enrollment due to affordable housing development. They also have 40R, which encourages development and around transit hubs as well too, and so train stations, bus hubs, other areas make sense. So I agree. I think it's both a carrot and a stick approach, and trying to find ways to incentivize communities to repurpose commercial spaces, and other things are part of the discussion that we need to continue to have at the State House. And
Senator, I'm happy to stay on and go longer. I certainly would love to, and I hate bringing the word up at the 59 minute of the hour, but I'd rather bring it up than not. But workforce, the impact of workforce is obviously extremely important. Health impacts. I'm happy to keep going if anybody wants to talk about that, or if we want to go to some closing remarks, whatever people have time for. So.
Well, I do want to be respectful of people's time, but I will just weigh in quickly on the workforce comment, in just that seeing, I'm very proud to have helped support and pass the Senate legislation to get us to a path to $15 minimum wage. But I will say that path to $15 minimum wage, it's staggered in over time. And so, and I know we went through the numbers about what affordability looks like. And so we are still falling short with the job openings that are out there compared to the rents that are out there. I think, and so when there's a shortage of places to live, there's going to be a shortage of workers to fill the jobs.
And I would just also tag on, and again, the senator has been working on this bill, but we're right now we have a moratorium in place from this Federal Center for Disease Control. As we continue to try to recover from this pandemic, it's due to expire at the end of June. We are not sure whether it will be extended on the federal level. In fact, it looks unlikely that it will. And so the senator has some legislation in. We now have a bunch of money, thanks to our congressional delegation, to provide rent relief to both small landlords and to renters for people who've gotten behind on their rent. And Senator has a bill in that brings those resources together and requires landlords to come together to apply for that rental assistance money potentially before they evict somebody. And so that legislation needs to move at the state level, particularly when it looks likely that federal protections will start to go away sometime this summer.
And I think just to follow up on that, in light of this conversation about the housing market and the constraints, what I'm hearing from folks is that if people are being evicted right now, they're becoming homeless. And so we need to be doing whatever we can to make sure that people are staying in their homes. And I know that hopefully we can share a link that if anybody is struggling and behind on rent, that they can apply. The program is open now. You can apply. It forgives, I believe, up to 18 months of your rent. And, your the landlord and the tenant have to agree to enter into the program. But the idea is to basically make sure that we are keeping people in their homes because we do not want to have a mass homelessness crisis following this pandemic. So thank you, Brenda, for bringing that up as well. With that, Ryan, I think we should go around for some closing remarks.
Excellent. And Brenda, we will start with you because you are the person unmuted right now.
Thank you. Well, I think I've said more than enough. Housing. We need to build more. We need to work with local partners to make sure it fits. We are building this to last. So we want this to be in communities and an asset to a community. But workers need a place to go home to every night. And as we've seen through this past year, how critical that safe and stable house is to us all. So, this is not a new message. We just simply need to be doing more.
Thank you, Brenda. And Christian.
Sure. I'd just like to make a point about the term workforce housing because it's generally used to talk about people that are moderate income, earning between 80% and say 140% of area median income. But as Rhonda points out, the folks that we're serving, only 2% of them are receiving TANF, the assistance formerly known as welfare. So we're really talking about the working class in this area, in this community, that are being priced out of the community. And so, I think workforce housing may have more viability in Newport because it's already met the 15%. It might be something that is achievable in Newport, despite that fact. But I just want to make the point that all of the housing we're producing is for people who are working, by and large. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. And Rhonda.
Well, I just want to say that with, about 50% of our Aquidneck Island renters being housing cost burdened, this need is widespread. It's real. And, we've got to come together as a community and solve this. We were able to solve some of our short-term homelessness during the pandemic, so we can do this. We have to. Thank you.
Thank you. And Senator?
One thing that I wanted to mention that I can't believe I didn't manage to sneak in earlier is just, I don't think we can have the conversation about housing and housing needs in Newport and in coastal communities and in vacation communities without addressing short-term rentals, because short-term rentals are truly displacing year-round families, and they are taking a chunk of housing stock off the market permanently for investment purposes. And, this is not a slam on anybody who is, purchasing those homes for those purposes, but from a housing policy perspective, perspective, we do need to address that issue and look at that issue as part of what we are looking at when we're addressing the housing crisis. I want to thank our panelists and not just for their time today, but for their time, ongoing time. They all get questions from me and calls from me, emails from me, and are very gracious in helping to get me current updated information and data. And so I want to thank all of them for their time and the information and their commitment to this issue. And I agree with Rhonda. This is something that we can solve. We have to do it together. And so thank you, everybody, for your time today and for your commitment to this important issue.
And not to carry on, but Annette, did you have anything else that you wanted to add? Any last minute thoughts here? I left you in the background. Oh, you're all set. Okay, perfect. I do want to thank everybody for being here today. This was great. Next time we'll have to plan for 90 minutes, 2 hours, half a day. We'll have to do this again really soon. There are a ton of comments on the feeds. What I will do is I'll put these together and I'll share them, and we'll try to get answers. If I can find answers, I will share them with you. So please keep sharing your comments, questions. This video you can watch afterward. You can share with people. It's available on whatsupnewp.com. I will also be putting the presentation that was Annette did, as well as Brenda, on the same story and link as well. A couple important, for more information about relief funds, it is Rental Relief RI. You will check that out. We didn't talk about it too much, but Building Futures RI, if you are looking, the skilled workforce is obviously been hit pretty hard, and there are some great opportunities through bfri.org. And I think that's a wrap, Senator. All right, that is a wrap. It is about 8 minutes past. I appreciate everybody for your time. We will have this discussion, very important discussion, again very soon. And thank you all for taking your time today.
Thanks, everybody.